New Zealand Standard 4804, 2001 Safety Systems and Safety Management Plan Audit Report Presentation. My name is Adrian Thompson. As you're aware, I'm the Principal HSE Advisor for Downer's Port Hedland Operation Branch. This Safety Systems and Safety Management Plan, or SMP audit, is intended on measuring the compliance of this branch to Downer's own commitment to the Australian New Zealand Standard 4804 Occupational Health and Safety Management Systems. The key items being audited, that will be presented a little later, are typically a clear indication of how each branch's own safety systems and SMP is meeting the minimum requirements of the Australian Standard 4804-2001. The delivery method devised for the purpose of presenting this report is as follows. We'll cover the audit objectives, onto the relevant acts, regulations and initiatives, brief description of the audit, to the audit findings, items of non-compliance, to the continued items of non-compliance, onto recommended actions for compliance, to the summary. We'll wrap up this presentation with the references at the end. Okay, so as this audit's intention and objective is not only ensure our operations compliance with Downer's systems of safety, but also to the Australian Standard 4804 OHS Management Systems Standard. Audits are designed to provide a powerful insight into how our operation is coping with compliance and how it can improve its current safety management systems performance, therefore reducing its potential for non-compliances in the future. The national OHS requirement for continuous improvement is evident in every aspect of business viability, from improving profitability by avoiding heavy penalties issued for non-compliance to legislation, but also by advancing business safety standards, therefore improving the chances of personnel returning home safely to their families. Okay, the relevant acts, regulations and initiatives. Australia's OHS framework, or Occupational Health and Safety Framework, is designed to apply law to OHS management in the workplace. The specific functions of Australia's OHS law framework applicable to the safety systems and SMP audit are comprised of acts, which are laws passed that are designed to enforce, using legislation, the regulatory frameworks of stated requirements. The Occupational Safety and Health Act 1984 is relevant to our operation and directly related to this audit, with such inclusions as this in small insert, Division 2, General Workplace Duties, Section 19, Duties of Employers, Section A, provide and maintain workplaces, planned systems of work, such as, so far as practicable, the employees are not exposed to hazards, i.e. our safety systems and our safety management plan. Okay, so the regulations, which are mandatory requirements providing minimum standards and also supporting acts. The Occupational Safety and Health Regulations 1996 is applicable to the previously mentioned Act and is relevant to us with this audit. Codes of practice, industry standards and guidance notes are designed to provide acceptable methods and ways of achieving compliance within the Acts and regulations. Although no codes of practice, industry standards or guidance notes are specifically associated to this audit, the Australian Standard 4804-2001 Occupational Health and Safety Management Systems is in direct relation to the audit. Failure to comply with these acts, regulations and the Australian Standard of this framework can result in fines of up to $625,000 for corporations and fines up to $312,500 imprisonment for 2 years for repeated offences. So a brief description of the audit. A brief description of the auditable items that Downer are required to have either at hand, posted in common areas and or accessible upon request include current health, safety and environmental policies, current and relevant legislation, appropriate risk assessment methods, training responsibilities, injury management and rehabilitation, and monitoring and inspection. As you can see, I've added a little insert here of the audit check sheet that was used in Appendix A. You'll notice the auditable items on the left, the weight of compliance column, the achieved column, the observation column on the far right. The achievability score is rated 0 to 3, 0 for non-compliant, 1 for minimal compliance, 2 for partial compliance, and 3 for full compliance. Okay, so the audit findings, we'll start with number 1, audit item, which is current safety policy in place and displayed. So we've achieved a 3, fully compliant. Current policies are displayed in the administration office and crib rooms. That's a tick. Communication of chart with site management, off-site management and contact numbers is displayed. So 2, we've got a partial compliance. This chart exists but is not displayed. Its information is current but it's not clearly visible to all personnel and visitors. So give it a cross and action will be applied. Copies of relevant legislation available. We've scored 3. All copies of acts, regulations, codes of practice and standards are accessible on Downer's intranet. Safety management plan in place an SMP is in place, current and accessible to all personnel. Does the SMP address all legislative requirements? So the SMP does cover all legislative requirements, so we scored a 3, fully compliant. Our position descriptions in place, we scored a 2, partial compliance. PDs are in place, they're not currently up to date as roles have been amalgamated, so we'll be applying action. Our site hazards addressed in the SMP. Site hazards are thoroughly addressed in the SMP, we scored a 3, fully compliant. Our local area hazards identified, heat, sun, spiders, snakes, cyclones, we scored a 3. Local hazards are covered and reviewed annually in the SMP. Is risk assessment methods described? Scored a 3. Down as departmental risk register and safe word method statements, or SWIMs. They assess the risk quite competently and completely. Scored a tick. So our control measures described, again we got a 3. Controls are very thoroughly described in the SMP. Is the monitoring process and responsibilities described? Again with 3. Monitoring accountabilities and responsibilities are covered quite clearly in the SMP. Has training for control measures been identified and implemented? So I've scored a 1 for minimal compliance. Training is implemented in the form of internal competencies for all aspects of zero harm, but nowhere is this stipulated as a requirement in the SMP to develop, maintain and record this, as stated in the standard. So we'll be applying an action to remedy this. Safety notice board is at adequate size, appropriate position. So I've scored a 3, fully compliant. Notice board is sufficient in information, size and position. Safety management plan advertised in the workplace. So again, I've scored a 1 for minimal compliance. The SMP is not advertised in the workplace. It is mentioned and explained in the branch, but definitely not advertised. So an action again will be applied to remedy this. Current injury management, fitness for work and employee relations policies in place. So we've got a 3, we're full compliant. These policies are in place and displayed in the administration office and crib rooms. Our regular site inspections being carried out. Fully compliant, we've got a 3. General site inspections carried out monthly, and the Downer IMS system, or Integrated Management System, specifies which site inspections and audits are to take place. So we've ticked for that, and we've scored at 92, which is sufficient for a pass, but we will have 4 items that will need to be looked at. So we'll start here. Item number 2, communication chart with site management, off-site management, contact numbers is displayed. So this is not completely compliant, as the chart, although it does exist and is current, it's not displayed. As mentioned earlier, every effort that Downer makes to ensure our systems comply relate back to our legislative requirements stated in the Australian New Zealand Standard 4804/2001. So as you'll see here, in 4.3.3.1 section of that standard, this little section here. So the provision of appropriate information to the organisation's employees, their representatives and other interested parties serves to motivate employees and encourage public understanding and acceptance of the organisation's efforts to improve its OHS performance. Therefore this is covered in the standard and we are non-compliant. Okay, so heading on to item number 6, are position descriptions in place? So PDs are in place. And they are sufficient in a zero harm perspective, but they're not exactly accurately titled to the positions held at this branch. So you'll also note here in the accountability responsibility section, 4.3.2.3, in order to ensure effective development and implementation of an occupational health and safety management system, it is necessary for the organisation to define the areas of accountability and responsibility to those personnel involved in the OHS management system operation. Okay. So we'll step over to item number 12, has training for control measures been identified and implemented? So training is implemented in the form of internal competencies for all aspects of zero harm, but nowhere is this stipulated as a requirement in the SMP to develop, maintain and record. You'll note in the standard section 4.3.2.5, training and competency, procedures should be in place to ensure that OHS competencies are developed and maintained. So in our SMP, they are not. On to item number 14, safety management plan policy advertised in the workplace. So our SMP is not advertised as is stated in our policy, but it is mentioned and explained in the induction, therefore the partial compliance. You'll note in section 4.1.4, occupational health and safety policy, line D, the policy should be documented, implemented, maintained, communicated to all employees. Okay, so there are 4 items that are going to need actions. And what I've done is I've To achieve compliance, I've put together an action plan to identify the actions that are required. Okay, so I've started with the action item number, the priority, which is an M, the status, still incomplete, the focus area, which is the Australian New Zealand Standard 4804/2001. I've stated the responsibility, HSC advisor, the accountability, which is the area manager, the date raised, the action entered by, and where you can reference the action to. Okay, so we'll start. So we'll begin with action item number 2. We're going to need to display the communication chart with site management, off-site management, contact numbers in the office and crib room. Okay, so that should remedy a shortfall there. No problem. Item number 6, update the position descriptions to the organisational chart. Again, pretty quick. I'll just be approaching HR, be asking for the new organisational chart, and I'll be adding this to our position descriptions. Okay. Action item number 12. We're going to need to amend the SMP and add down as standards for internal competency record keeping. Okay. So this is a little bit more entailed. I will be amending the document, send the document to document control, where it will need to be approved, and come back and then re-enter our system. Okay. So item number 14. You're going to need to print, laminate a copy of the SMP and display it in the common areas. Alright, so that's for an item of such non-compliance. We barely got in there. It's a rather easy remedy. Okay, so with those 4 actions, we'll definitely be bringing this audit and our score of 92 up to 100%, which is ideal. Okay, so just to summarise, the audit report that I've just delivered, I've mentioned the benefits of how a holistically compliant business can be affected and can benefit from complying. Okay, so with the occupational health and safety laws. Sorry, I've mentioned the relevant acts, regulations, and the Australian standard. I've covered a brief description of the audit and its findings of compliance and non-compliance. I've included my recommendations and my recommended actions to rectify our business's non-compliance and therefore improving our overall viability and future potential for success within our business. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you for listening.